Okay, returning to page 226, bottom of the first column, where I'm going to go to the last sentence of the previous paragraph for continuity. It says, the great teacher Dingyo also made it clear that the founders of the various other schools in China, by acknowledging allegiance to the doctrines of the Tentai, had escaped committing the error of slandering the correct teachings of Buddhism. Continuing. Later, however, conditions in the world declined, and people became increasingly shallow in wisdom. They no longer studied or understood the profound doctrines of the Tendai school, and the other schools became more and more firmly established to their own They no longer studied or understood the profound doctrines of the Tendai school, and the other schools became more and more firmly attached to their own prejudiced views. Eventually, the six schools and the True Word school turned upon and attacked the Tendai school, the latter growing ever weaker. In the end, found that it was no match for the other schools. To aggravate the situation, absurd new schools, such as Zen and Pure Land, which is Nimbutsu, appeared and began attacking the Tendai school as well. And more of its lay supporters transferred their allegiance to these erroneous schools. In the end, even those priests of the Tendai school who were looked up to as men of eminent virtue all admitted defeat and lent their support to these schools. Not only Tendai, but True Word and the six schools as well were forced to yield their lands and estates to these new misguided schools. And the correct teaching of the Lotus Sutra fell into oblivion. As a result, the sun goddess, the god Hachiman, the mountain king of Mount Hei, and the other great benevolent deities who guard the nation, no longer able to taste the flavor of the correct teaching, departed from the land. Demons came forward to take their place, and it became apparent the nation was doomed. Second column, last full paragraph, page 226. Here, with my humble outlook, so he's qualifying, this is my opinion that I shown it. Here, with my humble outlook, I have considered the differences between the teachings expounded by the Buddha Shakyamuni during the first 40 and more years and those expounded in the Lotus Sutra during the last 8 years of his life. Although both differ in many ways, contemporary scholars have already expressed the opinion, and it is my conviction as well, that the chief difference lies in the fact that the Lotus Sutra teaches that persons of the two vehicles can attain Buddhahood, and that the Buddha Shakyamuni in reality attained enlightenment at an inconceivably distant time in the past. When we examine the text of the Lotus Sutra, we see that it predicts that, page 227 at the top, that it predicts that Shariputra will become the thus come one flower glow. And the Meheke Shayapa will become the thus come one light bright. Shibuti will become the thus come one rare form. Katyayana will become the thus come one Jabunada gold light. Malgayana will become Tamalpatra sandalwood fragrance Buddha. Purna will become the thus come one law bright. Ananda will become mountain sea wisdom, unrestricted power king Buddha. Rahula will become the thus come one stepping on 7 treasure flowers. The 500 and 700 voice hearers will become the thus come one's universal brightness. And the 2,000 who have no more to learn or do, the thus come one, I have to almost start over. Thus come one universal brightness. The 2,000 who have more to learn or do not have more to learn will become the thus come one's jewel sign. The nuns Mahera Prajati and Yoshidera will become the thus come ones gladly seen by all living beings and endowed with 1,000, 10,000 glowing marks, respectively. So in the Lotus Sutra, all of these people that are disciples that are not Buddhas are all predicted to attain Buddhahood, even though they're voice hearers or cause awakened ones. And therefore, up until now, the sutras have all said that they cannot attain Buddhahood. Thus, if we examine the Lotus Sutra, we will realize that these persons are worthy of great honor. But when we search through the scriptures expounded in the period previous to the Lotus Sutra, we find to our regret that the situation is far different, because prior to Lotus Sutra, they were all scorned. The Buddha, the world-honored one, is a man of truthful words. Therefore, he is designated the sage and the great man. In the non-Buddhist scriptures of India and China, there are also persons called worthies, sages, or heavenly ascetics, because they speak words of truth. But because the Buddha surpasses all these, he is known as the great man. When he expounded the Lotus Sutra, this great man, the Buddhas, the world-honored ones, appear in the world for this one great reason alone. He also said, I have not yet revealed the truth. The world-honored one has long expounded his doctrines and now must reveal the truth. And honestly discarding expedient means, I will preach only the unsurpassed way. Many treasures Buddha added his testimony to the words of the Buddha, and the emanations of the Buddha put forth their tongues as a token of assent. Those who could not possibly doubt that Shariputra would in the future become the thus come one flower glow, that Mahekeshayapa will become the thus come one light bright, or that the other predictions made by the Buddha will come true? Pardon me. I have to start over because this is all a question. Okay. Many treasures, it's at the very top of 227. Many treasures Buddha added his testimony to the words of the Buddha, and the emanations of the Buddha put forth their tongues as a token of assent. They agreed also. Who then could possibly doubt that Shariputra will in the future become the thus come one flower glow, and the Mahekeshayapa will become the thus come one light bright, or that the other predictions made by the Buddha will come true? Nevertheless, all the sutras preceding the Lotus Sutra also represent the true words of the Buddha. The great and vast Buddha Flower Garland Sutra states, there are only two places where the great Medicine King tree, which is the wisdom of the thus come one, will not grow and bring benefit to the world. It will not grow in the vast void that is the deep pit into which persons of the two vehicles fall, or in the profoundly distorted and craving-filled waters wherein drown beings unfit for Buddhahood, who destroy their own roots of goodness. So Ichkantikas and people of the two vehicles, voice hearers and cause awakened ones, they can never attain Buddhahood. The passage may be explained as follows. In the snow mountains, there is a huge tree that has numberless roots. It is called the Great Medicine King Tree and is the monarch of all trees that grow in the land of Jampudvipa. It measures 168,000 yojanas in height. The other plants and trees of Jampudvipa depend upon the roots, branches, flowers, and fruit of this tree to attain their own flowering and fruition. Therefore, this tree is employed as a metaphor for the Buddha nature, and the various other trees and plants stand for all living beings. But this great tree will not grow in a fiery pit or in a watery circle. The fiery pit is used as a metaphor for the mind of the persons of the two vehicles, and the watery circle is used as a metaphor for the mind of Ishantikas, or persons of incorrigible disbelief. The scripture is saying, going on to page 228, that these two categories of beings will never attain Buddhahood. Of course, the Lotus Sutra says they will. It even gives the names that they will be as the Buddhas that they are to become. The Great Collection Sutra states there are two types of persons who are destined to die and not to be reborn, and who in the end will never be able to understand or repay their obligations. One is the voice hearer, and the other is the cause awakened one, persons in the two vehicles. Suppose that a person falls into a deep pit. That person will be unable to benefit himself or to benefit others. The voice hearer and the cause awakened one are like this. They fall into the pit of emancipation and can benefit neither themselves nor others because they're only concerned about themselves. That's why they're not bodhisattvas. The more than 3,000 volumes of Confucian and Taoist literature of China on the whole stress two principles: namely filial piety and loyalty to the sovereign. Remember when we started, it was about filial piety and loyalty were the first examples he gave when we started on 220. But loyalty is nothing more than an extension of filial piety. Filial piety may be described as lofty. Though heaven is lofty, it is no loftier than the ideal of filial piety. Filial piety may be called deep. Though earth is deep, it is no deeper than filial piety. Sages and worthies are the product of filial piety. It goes without saying, therefore, that persons who study the teachings of Buddhism must also observe the ideal of filial piety and understand and repay their obligations. The disciples of the Buddha must without fail understand the 4 debts of gratitude and know how to repay them. So this is basically saying that the Daishonin is saying, you better take care of your parents. You better respect your parents. You better perceive and understand the connection that you have with your parents, your teacher, and your sovereign. All of this is important if you are to manifest the state of life that you say you're aspiring toward. He says on page 228, first column, last paragraph, in addition, Shariputra, Maheke Shayapa, and the other disciples who were persons of the 2 vehicles carefully observed the 250 precepts and the 3,000 rules of conduct, mastered the 3 types of meditation known as flavor meditation, pure meditation, and free of outflows meditation, and the Agama Sutras, and freed themselves from the illusions of thought and desire in the threefold world. They must, therefore, have been models in the understanding and repaying of obligations. Top of page 228, second column. And yet the world-honored one declared that they were men who did not understand obligation. He said this because when a man leaves his parents and home and becomes a monk, he should always have as his goal the salvation of his father and mother. But these men of the 2 vehicles, although they thought they had attained emancipation, did nothing to benefit others. And even if they had done a certain amount to benefit others, they had not led their parents to a path whereby they could never, they had led their parents to a path whereby they could never attain Buddhahood. Thus, contrary to what one might expect, they became known as men who did not understand their obligations. Because if you don't attain Buddhahood, you can't lead your parents to attain Buddhahood. Their guarantee comes from your attainment. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, we read, Vimalakirti, however I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, pardon me. Once more questioned Manjushri, saying, what are the seeds of Buddhahood? Manjushri replied, all the delusions and defilements are the seeds of Buddhahood. All the delusions and defilements are the seeds of Buddhahood. Even though a person commits the 5 cardinal sins and is condemned to the hell of incessant suffering, he is still capable of conceiving the great desire for the way. The same sutra also says, good man, let me give you a metaphor. The plains and highlands will never bring forth the stems and blossoms of the blue lotus or the water lily. But the muddy fields that are low-lying and damp, that is where you will find these flowers growing. It also says, one who has already become an arhat and achieved the level of truth that goes with arhatship can never conceive the desire for the way and gain Buddhahood, because he only wanted arhatship. He was never going for Buddhahood. He just wanted to know stuff. He wasn't about salvation. That's what an arhat's doing, right? He says, it also says, one who has already become an arhat and achieved the level of truth, the wisdom that goes with arhatship, can never conceive the desire for the way and gain Buddhahood. No compassion. He is like a man who has destroyed the 5 sense organs and therefore can never again enjoy the 5 delights that go with them. The point of this sutra is that the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and foolishness can become the seeds of Buddhahood. And the 5 cardinal sins, such as the killing of one's father, can likewise become the seeds of Buddhahood. Ajatashatru, okay, is the perfect example. He killed King Bimbisara, but he still became the Buddha later in life when he repented. There are other examples of the same thing. Even if the high plains should bring, so the key is not the length of their lives, your parents, or what you did for them in this lifetime, did you do the thing that would assure their Buddhahood? That's the only way you can repay your debt of gratitude. You have to become the Buddha. Even if the high plains should bring forth blue flowers, which again, high plains don't have rain, so there's no blue lotuses there. Even if the high plains should bring forth blue lotus flowers, the persons of the two vehicles would never, this is the top of page 229, would never attain Buddhahood. The text is saying that when the goodness of the persons of the two vehicles is compared with the evils of ordinary people, it will be found that though the evils of ordinary people can lead to Buddhahood, the goodness of the persons of the two vehicles never can. Never can. Because the goodness of the persons of the two vehicles is all about being good for themselves. There's no concept of teaching or preaching to others. All right? The various Hinayana sutras censure evil and praise good. But this sutra, the Vimalakirti, condemns the goodness of persons of the two vehicles and praises the evils of ordinary people. Like Ajatashatru, who killed his father, King Bimbisara, but still became a disciple of the Buddha. Who still repented and broke out in boils and sores, if you remember. Do you remember? He was a disciple of Devadatta. It would almost appear that it is not a Buddhist scripture at all, right, the Vimalakirti Sutra, but rather the teaching of some non-Buddhist school. But the point is that it wants to make is absolutely clear that if the persons of the two the persons of the two vehicles can never become Buddhists, because it's a pre-Lotus Sutra teaching, the Vimalakirti Sutra, saying that's back again. Only the Lotus Sutra renounces this concept of they're screwed forever. Okay, page 229, middle, first column. The correct and equal Dharani Sutra states, Manjushri said to Shariputra, can a withered tree put forth new blossoms? Can a mountain stream turn and flow back to its source? Can a shattered rock join itself together again? Can a scorched seed send out sprouts? Shariputra replied, no. Manjushri said, if these things, are impossible, then why do you come with joy in your heart and ask me if Buddhahood has been predicted for you in the future? Voice here of Shariputra. Manjushri is a bodhisattva. Okay, he understands all this stuff. Do you understand what it just said? Again, what he's saying is the reason that the people of the two vehicles cannot attain Buddhahood is because they've destroyed the ability to become a Buddha with the cause of only caring about themselves. Even though they've gotten to the worlds of learning and realization, they have not aspired towards the world of Bodhisattva and Buddha. Right. They don't even believe they can get there. So let me read that again. The correct and equal Dharani Sutra states, from the middle of page 229 again, starting where I started again. Manjushri, a bodhisattva, said to Shariputra, a voice hearer, can a withered tree put forth new blossoms? Can a withered tree, a dead tree? You've killed the tree. The Buddhahood cannot give, the blossoms of Buddhahood can't come forth. Right. Can a mountain stream turn back and flow to its source? No. You've already done something to stop it. Mm-hmm. Can a shattered rock join itself together again? No. Can a scorched seed send out sprouts? No. Then why are you such, if these things are impossible, then why do you come with joy in your heart and ask me if Buddhahood has been predicted for you in the future? All right? It's not predicted until Shakyamuni does it. All right?
Right.
Okay. This passage means that just as a withered tree puts forth no blossoms, a mountain stream never flows backward, a shattered rock cannot be joined, and a scorched seed cannot sprout, so the person of the two vehicles can never attain Buddhahood. In their case, the seeds of Buddhahood has been scorched. Now again, this is saying all this is a prevailing belief. This is, he's not saying this like that's a fact. He's quoting what was the preceding understanding. He says, another one of the previous teachings, the larger wisdom sutra reads, all you sons of gods, if you have not yet conceived a desire for perfect enlightenment, unless if you're aspiring to Buddhahood, Now is the time to do so. If you should once enter the realm of the enlightenment of voice hearers, you would no longer be capable of conceiving such a desire for perfect enlightenment. You'd be so happy with what you got. Why is this? Because you would be outside the world of birth and death, which itself would constitute an obstacle. Because you can't, if you're not in the Sahe world, you can't be the Buddha. Right. This passage indicates that the Buddha is not pleased with the persons of the two vehicles because they do not conceive the desire for perfect enlightenment. Perfect enlightenment is the desire to make everyone equal to yourself. Okay? But that he is pleased with the heavenly beings because they do conceive such a desire. The Shuramagama Sutra states, if a person who has committed the 5 cardinal sins should hear of this Shuramagama meditation and should conceive the desire for supreme enlightenment, he would still be capable of attaining Buddhahood. But, world-honored one, an arhat who has put an end to the outflows is like a broken vessel and will never be capable of receiving and upholding this meditation. The Vimalakirti Sutra says, those who give alms to you are cultivating for themselves no field of good fortune. Those who give alms to you will fall into the 3 evil paths. This passage means that the human and heavenly beings who give alms to the sage monks, such as Maheke Shayapa and Shariputra, will invariably fall into the 3 evil paths. Sage monks such as these, one would suppose, must be the eyes of the human and heavenly beings and the leaders of all human beings, second only to the Buddha himself. It must have been very much against common expectation that the Buddha spoke out time and again against such men before great assemblies of human and heavenly beings as we have seen him do. In other words, how many times he spoke out against the very followers that are following him around while he's doing this preaching. The men of the voice hearers and the cause awakened ones. He says, it must have been very much against common expectation. Everybody would think that these guys are all solid and they're on the in group, right? Right. Against the common expectation, the Buddha spoke out many time and again against such men before the great assemblies of human and heavenly beings as we have seen him do. Was he really trying to reprimand his own disciples to death? Because don't forget, they're seeking alms, and he's saying, don't give these guys alms. You give these guys alms, it's going to undo your good fortune. Was he really trying to reprimand his own disciples to death? In addition, he employed countless different metaphors in expressing his condemnation of the persons of the 2 vehicles, calling them donkey's milk as compared to cow's milk, clay vessels as compared to vessels of gold, or the glimmer of a firefly as compared to the light of the sun. He did not speak of this in 1 word or 2, in 1 day or 2, in 1 month or 2, in 1 year or 2, or in 1 sutra or 2, but over a period of more than 40 years in countless sutras, addressing himself to great assemblies of countless persons, condemning the persons of the 2 vehicles without a single extenuating word. Thus, everyone learned that his condemnation was true. Heaven learned it and earth learned it. Not only 1 or 2, but hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s of people. The heavenly beings, dragon gods, and the asuras of the threefold world, all the human and heavenly beings, persons of the 2 vehicles, the great bodhisattvas, gathered in assembly from the 5 regions of India, the 4 continents, the 6 heavens of the world of desire, the worlds of form and formlessness, and the worlds of the 10 directions, and learned of it and heard of it. Then all these beings returned to their own lands, explaining the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha of the Sahe world, one by one to the inhabitants of their respective lands, so that there was not a single being in the countless worlds of the 10 directions who did not understand that Maheke Shayapa, Shariputra, and those like them would never attain Buddhahood, and it was wrong to give them alms and support. In the Lotus Sutra preached during the last 8 years of his life, however, the Buddha suddenly regretted and retracted his earlier position and instead taught that persons of the 2 vehicles can in fact attain Buddhahood. Could the human and heavenly beings gathered in the great assembly to listen to him be expected to believe this? would they not rather reject it and in addition begin to entertain doubts about all the sutras preached in this and earlier periods? They would wonder if all the teachings put forward in the entire 50 years of the Buddha's preaching were not, in fact, false and erroneous doctrines. To be sure, there is a sutra passage, top of page 230. To be sure, there is a passage that says, in these more than 40 years, I have not yet revealed the truth, from the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra. Nevertheless, one might wonder if the heavenly devil had not taken the Buddha on the Buddha's form and preached this sutra of the last 8 years, the Lotus and the Immeasurable Threefold Lotus Sutra. The Lotus. Pardon me. Nevertheless, one might wonder if the heavenly devil had not taken on the Buddha's form and preached this sutra of the last 8 years, the Lotus. In the sutra, however, the Buddha describes quite specifically how his disciples of the two vehicles will attain Buddhahood and reveals the kalpas and lands in which they will appear, the names they will bear, and the disciples they will teach. Thus, it becomes apparent that Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, is saying two different things. This clearly means that he is contradicting his own words. This is why the Brahmanists laugh at the Buddha and call him the great prevaricator. But just as the human and heavenly beings in the great assembly were feeling downcast in the face of this contradiction, the thus come one many treasures, who dwells in the world of treasure purity in the east, appeared in a huge tower adorned with the 7 kinds of treasures and measuring 500 yojanas high and 250 yojanas wide. The human and heavenly beings of the great assembly accused Shakyamuni Buddha of contradicting his own words, and although the Buddha answered in one way or another, he was in considerable embarrassment, being unable to dispel their doubts. When the treasure tower emerged out of the ground before him and ascended into the sky, it came forth like a full moon rising from the east, from behind the eastern mountains in the dark of night. The tower of 7 kinds of treasures ascended into the sky, clinging neither to the earth nor to the roof of the heavens, but hanging in midair. And from within the tower, a pure and far-reaching voice issued, speaking words of testimony. As the Lotus Sutra describes it, quote, at that time a loud voice issued from the treasure tower, speaking the words of praise. Excellent, excellent Shakyamuni, world-honored one. You that can take the great wisdom of equality, a law to instruct the bodhisattvas, guarded and kept in mind by the Buddhas, the Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law, and preach it for the sake of the great assembly. It is, as you say, Shakyamuni, world-honored one, all that you have expounded is the truth. And before I go on, understand that what he's basically saying here is that when we get in the Lotus Sutra, and he makes all these pronouncements about all these voice hearers and cause awakened ones that are in fact going to attain Buddhahood, and what their names are, and yada, 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 all that stuff. That's in chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Again, he's going toward the emergence of the treasure tower chapter, all right, which I think is 11. I'm not really positive off the top of my head. And why did the treasure tower emerge? Because as he's talking about this great contradiction in what he has said previously for 40 years, and that these disciples will in fact reach emancipation, everybody's going, but that isn't what you've been saying. Maybe this is all crap. So many treasures is there to go. Even though what he's saying has never been heard before, what he's saying is absolutely the truth, and I am here to attest to it. That's what I do. Every time he gets to this part, the Lotus Sutra, I make my appearance and I validate what he's saying is true. So don't disbelieve what he's saying now, even though as he was preparing you for this truth, he said something else. Okay, follow?
Yes.
All right, so that's what many treasures is now, his pure and far-reaching voice talking out of the tower, and everybody's like, what the fuck is going on? Elsewhere, the Lotus Sutra says, at that time, the world-honored one in the presence of Manjushri and the other immeasurable hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions of bodhisattvas and mahasattvas who from the old had dwelled in the Sahe world, as well as the human and non-human beings. Before all these, he displayed his great supernatural powers. He extended his long, broad tongue upward until it reached the Brahma heaven. And from all his pores, he emitted immeasurable, countless beams of light that illuminated all the worlds of the 10 directions. The other Buddhas seated on lion seats underneath the numerous jeweled trees did likewise, extending their long, broad tongues and emitting immeasurable beams of light. Okay, now why are they doing all this weird shit? It's to qualify what Shakyamuni and many treasures have just attested to as absolutely the truth. They're also saying, yes, he's not misleading you, even though he's never talked like this before. Believe in the Lotus Sutra, his highest teaching. The other Buddhas seated on lion seats underneath the numerous jeweled trees did likewise, extending their long, broad tongues and emitting immeasurable beams of light. And it also says Shakyamuni Buddha, page 231, first column, second to the last paragraph. It also says Shakyamuni Buddha caused the Buddhas who were emanations of his body, all these Buddhas that are lined up, that she says are emanations of his body, and had come from the 10 directions to return each one to his original land, saying, each of these Buddhas may proceed at his own pleasure. The Tower of Many Treasures Buddha may also return to his former position. Now, this doesn't happen until later in the sutra, but he does dismiss everybody so that everybody splits again. In the past, when the world honored one, I think it's chapter 23, if you want to know where, okay, out of 28. In the past, that's why he's not qualifying the specific places that it says this. He's just saying the Lotus Sutra says this, it says this, it says this. In the past, when the world honored one, at the very bottom of page 231, first column, in the past, when the world honored one of great enlightenment first attained the way, Buddhas appeared in the 10 directions to counsel and encourage him, and various great bodhisattvas were dispatched to him. When he preached the Wisdom Sutra, he covered the major world system with his long tongue, and 1,000 Buddhas appeared in the 10 directions. When he preached the Golden Light Sutra, the 4 Buddhas appeared in the 4 directions, and when he preached the Amida Sutra, the Buddhas of the 6 directions covered the major world system with their tongues. And when he preached the Great Collection Sutra, the Buddhas and bodhisattvas of the 10 directions gathered in the Great Treasure Chamber. But when we compare the auspicious signs that accompanied these sutras with those accompanying the Lotus Sutra, we find that they are like a yellow stone compared to gold, a white cloud to a white mountain, ice to a silver mirror, or the color black to the color blue. The bleary-eyed and the squint-eyed, the one-eyed and the wrong-viewed will be likely to confuse them. Since the flower garland was the first sutra to be preached, the middle of page 231 in the second column. Since the Flower Garland Sutra was the first to be preached, there were no previous words of the Buddha for it to contradict, and so it naturally raised no doubts. In the case of the Great Collection Sutra, the Larger Wisdom Sutra, the Golden Light Sutra, and the Amida Sutra, the Buddha, in order to censure the ideal of the 2 vehicles, demonstrated in the various Hinayana Sutras, described the Pure Lands of the 10 directions, and thereby inspired ordinary people and bodhisattvas to aspire to attain them. The Pure Lands would be Buddha lands, right? Thus he caused the persons of the 2 vehicles to feel confounded and vexed, because the 2 vehicles were going for wisdom, emancipation. They weren't going for salvation of all mankind, making all others equal to themselves. Okay, yes. So they were selfish, confused. Well, but they were confused because the whole thing has been understanding this great wisdom, right? That's what makes me special. That's why I'm an arhat. Okay, that's why I'm a close awakened one. All right. Again, there are certain differences between Hinayana Sutras and Mahayana Sutras mentioned above. We find that in some cases, Buddhas appear in the 10 directions. In others, great bodhisattvas were dispatched from the 10 directions, or it was made clear that the particular sutra was expounded in the worlds of the 10 directions, or that various Buddhas came from the 10 directions to meet in assembly. Page 232, first column. In some cases, it was said that Shakyamuni Buddha covered the major world system with his tongue, while others, it was the various Buddhas who put forth their tongues. All of these statements are intended to combat the view expounded in the Hinayana Sutras that in the worlds of the 10 directions there is only one Buddha. That's why you never aspired for Buddhahood. You only went for Arhat. That was as good as you could get, was Cause Awakened One. The highest level of Cause Awakened One is an Arhat. Okay? Do you understand? Yeah. That's why they weren't aspiring for it. Okay? But in the case of the Lotus Sutra, it differs so greatly. That's, pardon me, the Hinayana versus the Mahayana Sutras. I should qualify it that way, not anything. Okay. The Hinayana Sutras all qualify Arhats as far as you can go. The Agamas only say Sutras only say that's as far as you can go. All right? But in the case of the Lotus Sutra, it differs so greatly from the previous Mahayana Sutras that Shariputra and the other voice here is the great bodhisattvas and the various human and heavenly beings, when they heard the Buddha preach it, were led to think, is this not a devil pretending to be the Buddha? And yet those bleary-eyed men of the flower garland, Dharma characteristics, three treatises, true word, and Imbusa schools all seem to think that their own particular sutras are exactly the same as the Lotus Sutra. That is what I call wretched perception indeed. While the Buddha was still in this world, there were undoubtedly those who set aside the sutras he had taught during the first 40 and more years of his teaching life and embraced the Lotus Sutra. But after he passed away, it must have been difficult to find persons who would open and read this sutra and accept its teachings. To begin with, the sutras preached earlier run to countless words, while the Lotus Sutra is limited in length. The earlier sutras are numerous, but the Lotus Sutra is no more than a single work. The earlier sutras were preached over a period of many years, but the Lotus Sutra was preached over in a mere 8 years. Moreover, the Buddha, as we have seen, has been called the great liar, and therefore can hardly be expected to believe one can hardly be expected to believe his words. If one makes a great effort to believe the unbelievable, one can perhaps bring oneself to believe in the earlier sutras, but not in the Lotus Sutra. The people today appear to believe in the Lotus Sutra, but in fact, they do not believe in it. The reason is this. When someone assures them that the Lotus Sutra is the same as the Mahavrachana Sutra, or that it is the same as the Flower Garland Sutra or the Amida Sutra, they are pleased and put their faith in this person. If someone tells them that the Lotus Sutra is completely different from all the other sutras, they will not listen to him. Or even if they should listen, they would not think that that person was really speaking the truth. Nichiren has this to say. Okay, so him again, he's qualifying again. This is what I think. Nichiren has this to say in the middle of page 232, second column. It is now over 700 years since Buddhism was introduced to Japan. During that time, only the great teacher Dengyo truly understood the Lotus Sutra. But no one is willing to heed this fact that Nichiren has been teaching. It is just as the Lotus Sutra says. If you were to seize Mount Sumeru and fling it far off to the measureless Buddha lands, that too would not be difficult. But if after the Buddha has entered extinction in the time of evil you can preach this sutra, that will be difficult indeed. The powerful assertions I am putting forward are in complete accord with the sutra itself. They're quoting the sutra. But as the Nirvana Sutra, which is intended to propagate the Lotus Sutra, states, in the defiled times of the latter age, those who slander the correct teaching will be as numerous as the specks of dirt in all the lands of the 10 directions, while those who uphold the correct teaching will be as few as the specks of dirt that can be placed on a fingernail. What do you think? Would you say that the people of Japan can be squeezed onto the space of a fingernail? Would you say that I, Nichiren, occupy the 10 directions? Consider the matter carefully. Okay, I'm going to reread that so you can understand what I just said. All right, the powerful assertions, because the paragraph before, he starts with, Nichiren has this to say, right? So he's qualifying, this is my understanding.
Right.
The powerful assertions I am putting forward, that I'm saying I understand, are in complete accord with the sutra itself. I'm sure of that. I've done my homework. But as the Nirvana Sutra, which is intended to propagate the Lotus Sutra, states, pardon me, in the defiled times of the latter age, Those who slander the correct teaching will be as numerous as the specks of dirt in all the land of the 10 directions. Okay, so he says, in the defiled times, the latter age, those who slander the correct teaching will be as numerous as the specks of dirt. He's saying, am I, Nichiren, as a single person, as numerous as the specks of dirt? And then it says, while those who uphold the correct teaching will be as few as the specks of dirt that can be placed on a fingernail. What do you think of that? Would you say that the people of Japan can be squeezed onto? Do they have a correct understanding? Because if so, there's so few of them that they'll sit on a fingernail. So he's saying, would you say that the people of Japan can be squeezed on? Are they the right ones and I'm the wrong one? No, according to this, I'm the one that's fewer than the dirt you can place on a fingernail. They are the ones that are greater than all the specks of dirt in the 10 directions. Would you say that the people of Japan can be squeezed onto the space of a fingernail? Would you say that I, Nichiren, occupy the 10 directions? Consider the matter carefully. So he's qualifying. You're the one that has to decide whether I'm the correct teacher. This is what the teaching says. This is what I've been doing. Now, where's the problem here for you to understand that what I'm saying is correct? Okay, unless you're just ichkantik. In the reign of a worthy ruler, what is reasonable will prevail. But when a foolish ruler reigns, then what is unreasonable will have supremacy. One should understand that in similar fashion, when a sage in this world, page 233, top, one should understand that in similar fashion, when a sage is in the world, then the true significance of the Lotus Sutra will become apparent. In my remarks here, I have been contrasting the earlier sutras with the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra, and it would appear as though the earlier sutras are in a position to prevail. But if they really went out over the theoretical teaching, then it means that Shariputra and the other persons of the two vehicles will never be able to attain Buddhahood. That would surely be lamentable. I turn now to the second important teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, was born in the Kalpa of continuance in the ninth period of decrease, when the span of human life measured 100 years. He was the grandson of King Simhahanu and the son and heir of the king Shododana. As a boy, he was known as Crown Prince Siddhartha, or the Bodhisattva, all goals achieved. At the age of 19, he left his family, and at 30, he attained enlightenment. At his place of enlightenment, the world-honored one first revealed the ceremony of Vairocana Buddha of the Lotus Treasury World, a land of actual reward, and expounded the 10 mysteries, the 6 forms, the perfect interfusion of all things, and the subtle and wonderful great teachings of immediate attainment of the ultimate fruit. At that time, the Buddhas of the 10 directions appeared on the scene, and all the Bodhisattvas gathered about like clouds. In view of the place where Shakyamuni preached, the capacity of the listeners, the presence of the Buddhas, and the fact that it was the first sermon, is there any reason the Buddha could have concealed or held back the great doctrine? Therefore, the flower garland says, he displayed his power freely and expounded a sutra of perfection and fullness. Now again, don't confuse as he starts quoting the old sutras and they qualify how they're the only thing going on. It's not him saying that, it's him quoting those sutras and what they say for a point of context to what he's going to be saying here. I'm only on page 233. This is going to page 270. 280, whatever. We've got a long way to go. Okay, so he goes, therefore the flower garland sutra says he displayed his power freely and expounded a sutra of perfection and fullness. The flower garland sutra, which consists of 60 volumes, is indeed a sutra of perfection and fullness in its every character and stroke. It may be compared to the wish-granting jewel that, though it is a single jewel, is the equal of countless such jewels. For the single jewel can rain down 10,000 treasures, which are equal to the treasures brought forth by 10,000 jewels. In the same way, one character of the Flower Garland Sutra is equal to 10,000 characters. The passage that expounds the identity of the mind, the Buddha, and all living being represents the core not only of flower garland teachings, but of the teachings of the Dharma characteristics, 3 treatises, True Word, and Tendai schools as well. None of them are in the perfect teaching, qualified by Tendai. In such a superb sutra, how could there be any truths that are hidden from the hearer? He's asking logically, okay? And yet, the Daishonin says, and yet, we find the sutra declaring, the flower garland, declaring that persons of the 2 vehicles and Ikchantikas can never attain Buddhahood. Here is the flaw in the jewel. Moreover, in 3 places, the sutra speaks of Shakyamuni Buddha as attaining enlightenment for the first time in this world. It thus hides the fact that Shakyamuni Buddha actually attained enlightenment in the remote past. That's what these 2 things are enough to make the Flower Garland Sutra incorrect. All right, as the ultimate teaching. It thus hides the fact that Shakyamuni Buddha actually attained enlightenment in the remote past, as revealed in the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra. Thus, the Flower Garland Sutra is in fact a chipped jewel, a moon veiled in clouds, a sun in eclipse. A strange thing indeed. The sutras of the Agama, correct and equal, and wisdom periods, such as the Vajrayana Sutra, which is what True Word's based on, since they were expounded by the Buddha, are splendid works, and yet they cannot begin to compare with the Flower Garland Sutra. Therefore, one should hardly expect the doctrines concealed even in the Flower Garland Sutra would be revealed in these sutras. Okay? So, there's no Ichinen Sanzen, and there's no numberless major world system dust particle kalpas anywhere else but in the Lotus Sutra here. Thus, we find that the miscellaneous Agama Sutra speaks of Shakyamuni Buddha as having attained the way for the first time in his present existence, which is in opposition to what the Lotus Sutra says. The Great Collection Sutra says, it is 16 years since the thus come one first attained the way, as it says, even it doesn't say numberless major world system dust particle kalpas. And the Vimalakirti Sutra states, for the first time the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree and through his might conquered the devil. Likewise, the Vajrayana Sutra describes the Buddha's enlightenment as having taken place long ago when I sat in a place of meditation. And the Benevolent King's Wisdom Sutra refers to an event of 29 years in the past. It is hardly surprising that these sutras should speak in this fashion, but there is something that is an astonishment to both the ear and the eye. This is the fact that the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra also speaks in the same way. That he only attained Buddhahood under the Bodhi tree in this lifetime. And that's part of the Threefold Lotus Sutra, right? It's the introduction to the Lotus Sutra. Shakyamuni has not begun to preach the truth yet. Okay? Because what he says in the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra is what? In these more than 40 years, I have not yet revealed the truth. That's the whole big deal about the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra. It is hardly surprising that these sutras should speak in this fashion, but there is something that is an astonishment to both ear and eye. This is the fact that the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra also speaks in the same way as these other sutras. In the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra, the Buddha denies the great doctrines such as the Flower Garland Sutra concept of the phenomenal world as created by the mind alone, the concept of the ocean imprint meditation set forth in the Sutras of the Correct and Equal period, and the Wisdom Sutra concept of mutual identification and non-duality when he declares, I have not yet revealed the truth. The Immeasurable Meaning Sutra regards the practices taught in the previous sutras as practices that require many kalpas to complete. However, the same sutra says, in the past I sat upright in the place of meditation for 6 years under the Bodhi tree and was able to gain supreme perfect enlightenment. Using the same type of language as the Flower Garland Sutra, the first sutra Shakyamuni preached after his enlightenment, when it talks of the Buddha having attained enlightenment for the first time in this world. Strange as this may seem, we may suppose that since the Immeasurable Meanings Sutra is intended to serve as an introduction to the Lotus Sutra, it deliberately refrains from speaking about doctrines to be revealed in the Lotus Sutra itself. But when we turn to the Lotus Sutra, we find that in the sections where the Buddha discusses in both concise and expanded form the replacement of the three vehicles with the one vehicle, he says, the true aspect of all phenomena can only be understood and shared between Buddhas, from the Expedient Means chapter of the Lotus Sutra. The world-honored one has long expounded his doctrines and now must reveal the truth. And honestly discarding expedient means I will preach only the unsurpassed way. Moreover, many treasures Buddha testifies as to the verity of the 8 chapters of the theoretical teaching, declaring that all these are true. We would suppose, therefore, that in them there would be nothing held back or concealed. Nonetheless, the Buddha hides the fact that he attained enlightenment countless kalpas ago, for he says, I first sat in the place of meditation and gazed at the tree and walked around it. This is surely the most astonishing fact of all. Because even the Lotus Sutra, outside of the emerging from the earth and the 16th chapter, the 15th and the 16th chapters also speaks of him in this lifetime attaining Buddhahood. Only when the bodhisattvas of the earth appear, and as he's preaching, explaining who they are, does he qualify numberless major world system dust particle kalpas ago. In the expedient means he's already discussed and qualified what Sanzen Jintingo is. Okay, when he was the son of the 16th great universal wisdom. I'm getting too far ahead of myself. Let me go back. Here he goes. Again. He says, I'm going to go from page 234 at the bottom again. Strange as this may seem, we may suppose that the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra is intended to serve as an introduction. Strange as this may seem, that that the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra also is not speaking of the fact that he's attained enlightenment countless lifetimes ago. Since the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra is intended to serve as an introduction to the Lotus Sutra, it deliberately refrains from speaking about doctrines to be revealed in the Lotus Sutra itself. But when we turn to the Lotus Sutra, we find that in the sections where the Buddha discusses in both concise and expanded form the replacement of the three vehicles with the one vehicle, he says the true aspect of all phenomena can only be understood and shared between Buddhas. The world-honored one has long expounded his doctrines and now must reveal the truth. And honestly discarding expedient means I will preach only the unsurpassed way. It was lifespan, 16th chapter. Moreover, many treasures Buddha testifies to the verity of the 8 chapters of the theoretical teaching, where he is saying all this and declaring that all of these cause awakened people and voice hearers are going to attain Buddhahood in the future and what they'll be called and all that. Declaring these are all true. We would suppose, therefore, that in them there would be nothing held back or concealed. Nevertheless, the Buddha hides the fact that he attained enlightenment countless kalpas ago, for he says, I first sat in the place of meditation and gazed at the tree and walked around it. This is surely the most astounding fact of all, that in the theoretical teaching, he doesn't reveal the element of the essential teaching of numberless major world system dust particle kalpas. In the Emerging from the Earth chapter, the 2nd chapter, a multitude of bodhisattvas who had not been seen previously in the more than 40 years of the Buddha's preaching life suddenly appear. And the Buddha says, I taught and converted them and caused them for the first time to set their minds on the way. Bodhisattva Maitreya, puzzled by this announcement, says, World-honored one, when the thus come one was crowned prince, you left the palace of the Shakyas and sat in the place of meditation not far from the city of Gaya, and there attained supreme perfect enlightenment. Barely 40 years or more have passed since then. World one, honored one, how in that short time could you have accomplished so much work as a Buddha? At the top of page 235. In order to dispel this doubt and puzzlement, Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, then preaches the lifespan chapter. Because he's talking about the bodhisattvas of the earth here. I thought he was. Referring first to the version of the events presented in the earlier sutras and the theoretical teaching of Lotus Sutra, he says, in all the worlds, the heavenly and human beings and asuras all believe that the present Shakyamuni Buddha, after leaving the palace of the Shakyas, seated himself in the place of meditation not far from the city of Gaya, and there attained supreme perfect enlightenment. Okay, he's saying this now at the beginning of the lifespan chapter. But then, in order to dispel their doubts, he says, but good men, it has been immeasurable, boundless, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions of nayutas of kalpas since I, in fact, attained Buddhahood. All the other sutras, such as the Flower Garland, Wisdom, and Mahavrachana, not only conceal the fact that people of the two vehicles can attain Buddhahood, but they also fail to make clear that the Buddha attained enlightenment countless kalpas in the past. These sutras have two flaws. First, because they teach that the 10 worlds are separate from one another, they fail to move beyond the provisional doctrines and reveal the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, as it is expounded in the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Second, because they teach that Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment for the first time in this world, referring only to his provisional aspect, they fail to reveal the fact stressed in the essential teaching that the Buddha attained enlightenment countless kalpas ago. These two great teachings are the core of the Buddha's lifetime of teachings and the very heart and marrow of all the sutras. The expedient means chapter, which belongs to the theoretical teaching, expounds the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, making clear that persons of the two vehicles can achieve Buddhahood. It thus eliminates one of the two errors found in the earlier sutras, but it nevertheless retains the provisional aspect and fails to reveal the eternal aspect of the Buddha's enlightenment. Thus, the true doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life remains unclear, and the attainment of Buddhahood by persons of the two vehicles is not properly affirmed. Such teachings are like the moon seen in the water, or rootless plants that drift on the waves. When we come to the essential teaching, the last 14 chapters, teaching of the Lotus Sutra, then the belief that Shakyamuni first obtained Buddhahood during his present lifetime is demolished, and the effects of the four teachings are likewise demolished. When the effects of the four teachings are demolished, the causes of the four teachings are likewise demolished. Thus, the cause and effect of the 10 worlds as expounded in the earlier sutras and the theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra are wiped out, and the cause and effect of the 10 worlds in the essential teaching are revealed. This is the doctrine of original cause and effect. It reveals that the 9 worlds are all present in beginningless Buddhahood, and that Buddhahood is inherent in the beginningless 9 worlds. This is the true mutual possession of the 10 worlds, the true 100 worlds, the 1,000 factors, the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. I'm sorry I'm starting to get emotional, but because this is like the essence of everything right now, what he's getting into here. Let me go back to the middle of page 235. Excuse me just a moment. Page 235, second column. What he's explaining is that how could Shakyamuni say all this and then say this? It's because once he says this, all of this is provisional. You understand it as an expedient means. That's why he's saying it was wiped out. So whatever you attribute to it also gets wiped out. Okay? So when we come to the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra, then the belief that Shakyamuni first obtained Buddhahood during his present lifetime is demolished. Because he's explaining numberless major world systems, dust particle kalpas, since I in fact attained Buddhahood. And so once that baloney is demolished, that it only happened under the Bodhi tree, then everything else is associated with wisdom that pertains to that thing that isn't completely the truth is no longer what you should rely on. It's demolished. Right. That's what he's saying. When we come to the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra, the last 14 chapters, then the belief that Shakyamuni first obtained Buddhahood during his present lifetime is demolished. And the effects of the four teachings are likewise demolished. The correct and equal, the pure, the this and that, right? It's all about the teaching of Buddhahood are likewise demolished. When the effects of the four teachings are demolished, the agamas, the correct and equal, the wisdom and all that, the causes of the four teachings are likewise demolished, the things that he utilized to qualify them as the truth. Thus, the cause and effect of the 10 worlds, as expounded in the earlier sutras and the theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra, are wiped out. And the cause and effect of the 10 worlds of the essential teaching are revealed, the true 10 worlds. This is the doctrine of original cause and effect. The original cause and effect that goes back to Kuan, not numberless major system Dust particle kalpas. It goes beyond Shakyamuni. It's the original teaching, the original causality. That's what allows for actual Ichinen Sans. And that's what he's trying to explain here. That's the difference between the Buddhahood that I represent and the Buddhahood that all these other guys represented. Even Tentai. Okay, it was theoretical until the truth that was hidden in the depths of the 16th chapter, which is what he said, demolished everything else. Do you get it?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry I'm getting a little loud, but this is really important. This is the doctrine of original cause and original effect. It reveals that the 9 worlds are all present in beginningless Buddhahood, Kuan Buddhahood, and that Buddhahood is inherent in the beginningless 9 worlds, Kuan 9 worlds. In other words, life itself, there's no separation. Okay? It's all a continuum from the original state to this moment and beyond eternally. This is the true mutual possession of the 10 worlds, the true 100 worlds and 1,000 factors, the true 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. When we consider the matter in this light, bottom of page 235, last paragraph, second column. When we consider the matter in this light, we can see that Mahavajracana Buddha seated on the lotus petal of the 10 directions as described in the Flower Garland Sutra, the little Shakyamuni described in the Agama Sutras, and the provisional Buddhas described in the sutras of the correct and equal and wisdom periods, such as the Golden Light, Amida, and Mahavajracana Sutras, are no more than reflections of the Buddha of the lifespan chapter. They are like the fleeting reflections of the moon that float on the surface of various large and small bodies of water. The scholars of the various schools of Buddhism, confused as to the nature of the Buddha of their own school, and more fundamentally ignorant of the Buddha of the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, mistake the reflection in the water for the actual moon. Some of them entering the water and trying to grasp it in their hands, others attempting to snare it with a rope. As Tentai says, they know nothing of the moon in the sky, but gaze only at the moon in the pond. Having pondered this, page 236, first full paragraph, first column. Having pondered this, I am of the opinion, again, he's requalifying, this is Nichiren's teaching. Having pondered this, which means he didn't just listen to somebody else say something. He's thought it through. He's challenged his enlightenment. You got to do the same thing. Having pondered this, I've pondered this. I pondered the shit out of this to be able to talk to you like I am right now. Having pondered this, I am of the opinion that, though the Lotus Sutra teaches that persons of the 2 vehicles can attain Buddhahood, this view tends to be overshadowed by the opposite view propounded in the sutras that precede the Lotus. How much more so is this the case when the doctrine that the Buddha attained enlightenment in the remote past? For in this case, it is not the Lotus Sutra as a whole that stands in contradiction to the earlier sutras, but the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra that stands in contradiction both to the earlier sutras and to the first 14 chapters of the theoretical teaching of the Lotus. Moreover, of the latter 14 chapters of the essential teaching, so it's not, the truth isn't completely revealed in the first 14 chapters. It's not revealed until the 15th and 16th. He's saying, moreover, of the latter 14 chapters of the essential teaching, the last 14 chapters of the Lotus Sutra, all of them with the exception of the emerging from the earth and the lifespan chapters, retain the view that the Buddha first attained enlightenment in his present lifetime. Can you understand that? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pause there, and I'll take it back again, and I'll help make that more explainable.